call to order the Planning Commission meeting, special meeting of January 19, 2023 at 7 o'clock. Before we move on to roll call, I'd like to take a moment and welcome Ms. Wanda Moody, our newest commissioner on the commission here. Would you like to share a few words on yourself, or?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. Of course, everyone knows this is my first evening, so I want to say to myself, welcome. This is going to be a very interesting endeavor that I'm undertaking, but I know if I stay focused and understand that we're not here for any ulterior motive, that I'm here to just work with the commission and do the right thing for the citizens here in East Point. So I look forward to this, to everyone here with me. I know you're going to guide me the right way because this is the very first time. So I just say thank you for having me and welcoming me.
Welcome. Secretary, if you would please call the roll.
Ms. Naylor?
She will be late.
Mr. Lalonde?
Present.
Ms. Moody? Ms. Julinski here. Mr. Luback?
Present.
Chairman DeHaan?
Present. And Mr. Broll?
Well, I knew he was excused.
Okay.
Mr. Broll? Mr.
He's-
Broll?
He is
Mr.
an
Broll.
excused absence.
Bueller. Bueller.
Thank you for catching on to that.
Before we move on to the approval of the agenda, I would like to poll the commission tonight because 200 pages is awfully hefty to go through with accuracy. I'd like to poll the commission and see how far we want to go tonight. I don't know if getting all the way is reasonable. Any thoughts? Ms. Julinski?
I do not. Do you want to put a timestamp on it? Do you want to put an article number on it?
I can
Does
go
Ms.
either way.
Brodaszewski have an input?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's an excitement to be here. I think that we could move along with the agenda as prepared. Staff's prepared some talking points, and then we can see how comfortable we are, and the chair can determine if we need to table the remaining items as we discuss them if we need more time.
Mr. Lubeck?
Well, I guess I'm going to get on my soapbox for a moment. I was really disappointed to get this package so close to having to have a meeting, only to find out 72 hours later, the revised package showed up, giving me 72 hours to try to get through this. That's frustrating. I started out in doing this back on the Zoning Board of Appeals, and I got to look at the ordinances that had been pushed through, how poorly they matched the city, and all the unintended consequences in it. And I've tried to bring that to my time here on the Planning Commission, is to kind of review those things with the knowledge of hindsight that I have. I appreciate the summary, it's helpful. My concern is, does the verbiage match the intention? Because I found out through that time on the Zoning Board of Appeals, there was a lot of intention, but the verbiage didn't live up to it. I'll cite one that was an example and quite an eye-opener. The old fence ordinance had a description of privacy fences as a fence constructed of any material that blocks air and light. Case came before us, somebody had replaced on a corner lot a chain link fence with a picket fence, and at that time, privacy fences were not allowed on corner lots. They had some very nice pictures of their landscaping, and it was noticed that the chain link fence was casting a shadow. The shadow can only be cast by something that blocks light. Thus, under that ordinance, and for many years, a chain link fence actually qualified as a privacy fence. And I don't want to see things like that happening again. So I have not had the opportunity to go through this with the diligence I would like. And I think we deserve too few hours to try to be approving a document that's supposed to guide this city for the next 17 years. So I'm willing to work through as much of this as I can tonight, although are we expected to vote? Because if we are, I don't know that I'm willing to approve anything tonight.
Mr. Lalonde, do you want to do a hard stop at a certain time, or do you want to work, through a few articles? Any preference?
Yeah, 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock?
Yeah, that's my suggestion.
Okay. Ms. Moody?
I agree with 9.
Okay.
I also agree with the gentleman there that I took an opportunity to peruse this, to go through it as much as possible, sticky notes, but by this being my first time here, I would say 9 o'clock, not attempt to go through all of it.
I'm going to go back to Ms. Ulinski. How do you feel about 9 o'clock?
I'm okay with it.
Okay.
I'm okay with 9 o'clock, and I'm just realizing one of our most valuable assets is not present tonight. Mr. Broll seems to have a unique ability to look at things in a light different than the rest of the planning commission. And I think without him here, we would be doing a disservice to
Okay.
do too much.
So then I'm hearing 9 o'clock. Can I get a commissioner to make a motion that we approve the agenda under the proviso that we have a 9 o'clock hard stop?
So moved.
Second.
We have motion and support. Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Lubeck,
Yes.
Mr. Lalonde,
Yes.
Ms. Moody,
Yes.
Ms. Julinski, yes. Chairman DeHunt?
Yes. Before we move on to the first hearing of the public, we have, I believe we have a few people in the audience potentially that Ms. Holman is going to introduce. Ms. Holman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, with the importance of this, we do have some guests here in the audience. Mr. John Jackson, who is the president of McKenna. As you know, Laura and Mara have been very instrumental in putting all this together, so he is here tonight. Of course, our city manager, Mariah Walton. We have our building official, Dennis Szymanski, who has been part of the steering committee. Of course, we always have our fire marshal. I do also want to point out that we have Stephanie Pena. She is our redevelopment ready certification community, redevelopment ready community representative from the MEDC. She is the one whose letter was read at the last meeting. Her team has been following this process quite closely. They believe that some of the changes, some of the discussions have been very innovative, and they are looking to this process, in terms of moving forward with some of their best practices. So we thank you for coming. I also do want to point out, we do have another member of the steering committee here, Andrea Troutman from our DDA board, who was at all the steering committee meetings. I don't mean to exclude anybody else, but with the time that she put in on the steering committee, I do want to recognize her. Thank you.
Ms. Pena.
And of course, we know Mr. McCain. You have met Mr. McCain. He's got an official nameplate. He doesn't need an introduction.
The man behind the wall. Ms. Pena, do you wish to say anything this evening? Or introduce yourself, or, okay.
Hello, all. Thank you again for having me this evening. Hello, McKenna. It is so wonderful to see you. I've been following, prior to my current role at MEDC, I worked with McKenna, and I worked with Laura when she was working on the 9 Mile strategic plan. To see the efforts that they've done come this far in these very impactful zoning ordinance amendments and adjustments is really amazing, especially to try to support the continued vibrancy of 9 Mile and East Point in general. So very excited to see you all approach this process. I completely understand that it can be overwhelming, so taking time is understandable. But looking from outside in, I'm really excited of what's being proposed this evening and really looking forward to its implementation moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. With that said, we'll move into the first hearing of the public. If anybody wishes to be heard, they have 3 minutes. The podium is yours. Please write your name on the piece of paper that should hopefully be up there with a pen. Anybody wish to be heard? Seeing none, we will move on to the approval of the minutes from January 5th, 2023. Do we have a motion for the approval of minutes of the normal meeting?
I'd like to make a motion to table that until we have a full board here.
Do we have support for tabling the minutes approval?
I'll support.
We have motion and support. Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Lubeck?
Yes.
Mr. Lalonde?
Yes.
Ms. Moody?
Yes.
Ms. Julinski, yes. Chairman DeHunt?
Yes. Moving on to the public hearing. Well, do we have anybody in the public wishing to comment on what we are proposing? Please write your name on the piece of paper up there, please.
How are you? My name is Jack Barry, and I'm a property owner over here at East Point. I own a property actually right across the street at 23315 Gratiot, the old Hertz car rental. And my concern is, and I'm sorry I was late for the meeting. I got tied up, but I didn't hear everything. I don't know exactly the plan. I was trying to get a little bit of insight online. I couldn't find anything. My concern is when they change zoning, isn't that going to also devaluize some of the properties that currently have stronger zoning than you guys are pushing forward with? And I think that would affect a lot of properties possibly with some of the uses that they're allowed to do. And that's it.
Okay. I would reach out, if you don't mind, after the meeting, maybe reach out to Ms. Holman and Ms. Brashevsky there. They might be able to help you a little bit further.
Okay.
Yes.
I would recommend that the planning commission make a motion actually to open up the public hearing for this evening, and then entertain any comments and then close that. Thank you, Ms. Hawk.
Thank you.
I make a motion to open the public hearing on the 2023 zoning ordinance update.
Do we have second?
Second.
We have motion and support.
Mr. Lubeck?
Yes.
Ms. Moody?
Yes.
Mr. Lalonde?
Yes.
Ms. Julinski, yes. Chairman DeHunt?
Yes. I was just so excited to get going. Do we need to have the gentleman restate his comments now?
I don't think that's necessary.
Okay. So then, does anybody else wish to be heard in this corrected public hearing? Seeing none, we close the public hearing. Moving on to new business. Ms. Brashevsky. It's all you. Or Ms. Hall.
Thank you, Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be before you this evening and for the opportunity to present the draft zoning ordinance tonight. This represents a significant revision since the last kind of overhaul was done approximately a decade ago. And it's a really great opportunity for the city to modernize and streamline and update the ordinance to match the vision for the future of the city. So I just wanted to start off and just set the expectation this evening from McKenna. Mara and I tonight would like to give a presentation on the zoning ordinance and highlight some of the key areas that we think are most impactful and have changed and how those align with the city's adopted master plan and RRC best practices. It's also an important opportunity for the commission to be able to ask any questions tonight and to provide feedback on sections for us to go back and look at further if desired. We have intentionally not requested any action in our supporting cover memo this evening. We understand that this is a large document. This is a significant rewrite to your zoning ordinance, and we anticipate that this would, at a minimum, continue into the February meeting. Mara and I are also available if you'd like to discuss any of the zoning ordinance sections one-on-one in the next several weeks. We're happy to make that time and meet in person or discuss over the phone with you. So to just kind of recap from the beginning, this planning process for the zoning ordinance started in earnest about a year ago when the city administration partnered with MEDC and the Redevelopment Ready program to revise the ordinance. Civic engagement really was at the forefront of this update. A steering committee was established, which met 7 times throughout 2022. Public outreach was conducted at the Gratiot Cruise event in June. And there were numerous public meetings with the DDA, the Planning Commission, such as building design and parking, as well as ongoing discussions and tours and meetings with the city administration, the RRC representatives, and Macomb County. So the culmination of those efforts has really led to the draft that is before you tonight. In addition, there are 2 planning documents of the city that largely influence the development of this draft. The first is your adopted 2040 master plan, and the second is the 9-mile strategic corridor plan, which was adopted in March of last year. Both of those plans involved extensive public engagement, and they present East Point's vision for the future. One of the primary goals of this ordinance update was to provide East Point with the zoning tools, the actual mechanism to effect change that would be aligned with those planning documents. As new redevelopment and reinvestment occurs in the city, the zoning ordinance will allow you to make sure that that vision is being implemented. So one of the first aspects that we wanted to discuss tonight is the zoning map and the zoning districts. So on the screen, you have page 6 of Article 2. And this summary table lays out the proposed zoning districts, which are also represented on the new zoning map. One of the largest changes in the zoning ordinance update was the move away from single-use districts. So for instance, your current zoning code has office service district where primarily the only uses are office. This new code introduces mixed-use districts, which promote a more vibrant and active commercial and residential areas. And those are largely on 10-mile, Kelly, 8-mile, etc. The proposed districts, as you can see in this table, also represent a consolidation of your current zoning districts. So for instance, there were 5 residential districts before. This has been slimmed down to 2, with residential integrated into the mixed-use districts. There are 3 mixed-use districts. The first, MU1, is the least intensive, and that's the neighborhood mixed use. This is largely along the Kelly Road, 10-mile, Stevens, and Topher corridors. The MU2, the Main Street mixed use, is the second intensive mixed use district, and this is largely only located along 9-mile. And this represents the zoning recommendations from the 9-mile strategic corridor plan. The most intensive commercial district is the MU3, the regional mixed-use district, and this is largely located on 8-mile, Gratiot, outside of the DDA area, and at 9-mile and 94. There's also the downtown, the DT district, which is aligned to the current DDA district and then slightly extends north and south along Gratiot Avenue. And then there is the LI, the light industrial district. And there are only, a few select locations for that in the city, similar to what you have today. There are also 2 overlay districts. That would be the central downtown overlay at 9 and Gratiot, and the Gratiot Gateway overlay
at Gratiot and 8 Mile. And Mara will be discussing both of those overlays in a little bit more detail later tonight. So one of the important changes to this code was the addition of a summary use table, which starts on page 8 of your zoning ordinance. And these use tables are very convenient for business owners and property owners so that they can understand, just at a glance, what uses are either permitted by right, which is identified by the P, or permitted by special land use, which is identified by the S symbol, and color-coded respectively.
Ms. Hall, I have a question. I want to back up just a little bit. You said that the new business district will go a little further north and a little further south than the current DDA. What is the line of demarcation? Where does it go now?
Yeah, thank you, Mara, for zooming in a little bit. So you can see that that red color along Gratiot, it extends a few blocks to the north.
Does it go south as well?
Yes, it does.
And how far south?
Can
Can you give me a street?
you zoom in, Mara, to see the street? We extended the downtown district to those areas based on the current building configuration, so as not to create nonconformities, but to expand that built character and that walkability. And then it intersects with the other mixed-use districts to the north and south along Gratiot.
So is the vision to see these folks rolled into the DDA and essentially have an expanded DDA now?
This would not impact the DDA or the taxable value of the district. There are no changes proposed to those development area boundaries. This would just be simply the zoning regulations that would impact the use and the character, the building type. So it's the form of the downtown is being expanded. The DDA boundaries themselves are not. So on the south, Chestnut, I think.
The Crescentwood? So it goes on the other side of Winter Sausage, and then it goes all the way up to where? Okay.
Oh, yep.
So it's not including this gentleman's, oh, it would be including this gentleman's business across the street, the old Hertz. Okay,
It doesn't? I'm sorry.
okay, thank you. Sorry.
All right, so going back to the use table, as I mentioned, this demarcates all of the uses in all the zoning ordinances across the city as permitted or special land uses. If it's a permitted use by right, this may still require site plan review depending on the scope of the project, which we'll discuss a little bit later in the development review processes. If it's a special land use, that still requires a public hearing, notification to the adjacent property owners within 300 feet, and planning commission review and recommendation to city council, so that has not changed. The uses in the zoning ordinance have also been expanded upon. So for instance, uses such as missing middle housing typologies, breweries, artisan spaces, live-work units, those have all been added to the districts. And then moving forward, this is in Article 2, and the next article starts the residential uses, Article 3. And that has a use table as well, but it's been consolidated to just represent the residential uses. So if you're looking at Article 3, it's only going to show you the residential uses, whereas that summary table contains everything.
We have a question.
Sure.
Okay, as I'm looking at this chart, which is a big improvement over what we've had to live with before, I'm going to ask a question. That green bar at the top of page 8, the land use, is there a way to carry that onto every page?
Yes.
Because by the time I get to page 9.5, I'm already lost without it.
Yep. That's a easy fix that we can add, definitely. That will make it more intuitive.
There's really some in-depth conversation here, specifically bed and breakfast, incubator kitchens, artisan makerspace. I mean, it's things that we have probably never talked about that should have been talked about.
One of the other important additions, I think, to this section, it's on page 7, is that it provides some flexibility for the planning commission to evaluate a use that is not listed in the zoning ordinance, that may be similar in character and intensity to a use permitted in a given district, and to consider that use by special land use approval. So that's a more inclusive approach to uses that may occur in the future and cannot be contemplated at this time, but still providing a uniform approach to handling those.
Okay, do we have any other questions about the use in zoning districts before I move into the overlay?
Anybody? Okay.
Thank you. All right, thanks, Laura. Now that we're a little bit more familiar with the zoning ordinance districts and the use table, let's direct our attention to page 33 and 34 of Article 6. So I'm also going to go there with you guys. Okay. So I'm discussing a little bit more detail about the overlays that we are proposing. So overlays are a tool that allows for specific design standards for certain areas without the need to create a whole new zoning district. So uses within these overlays are similar to the proposed zoning district, but staff and steering committee and planning commission have deemed it necessary that these, and also the Downtown Development Authority, have deemed it necessary that these strategic areas need a little bit more design and development guidance. So that's what the purpose of our overlay districts are. We created two new overlays, I'll just say, the Central Downtown Overlay and the Gratiot Gateway Overlay. We were guided to produce these overlays because one of the master plan, the Gratiot Gateway, is announced in the master plan. This is the intersection of 8 Mile and Gratiot. So we used the intent statement as directed in the master plan to create the intent statement for the overlay and the proposed zoning ordinance. So we can look at the map to look at the designated areas of the overlays. The first one that we can see in our central area is the Central Downtown Overlay. And as we can see, actually I don't have it on the screen, but the purpose of this overlay is to require higher floor density on key parcels at the City of East Point's downtown core intersection, the intersection of our 9 Mile and Gratiot Avenue. Density will create a major node in the city and therefore will bolster the downtown scene here. Okay, moving on to the Gratiot Gateway Overlay, as we can see at the intersection of 8 Mile and Gratiot. The Gratiot Gateway is intended to promote the area as a gateway to East Point and Macomb County and improves perception and creates a welcoming and culturally rich environment. The overlay encourages increased heights for both commercial and residential buildings and acts as a transit hub. The overlay also provides public spaces where people of all ages can gather and participate in activities by incorporating the existing and potential expansion of the transit system. Again, these overlays are created to assign higher design standards to smaller commercial nodes, or what we call smaller commercial nodes. It's also specific areas of interest. That's what a node is. Do we have any topics of discussion as we move forward with the rest of Article 6?
There was some really compelling charrettes, I believe they're called, done during Mayor Pixley's years. And I remember seeing those. I can't remember what the conversations were, but I remember there being some really compelling ideas about a transit station. I think there was something around 8 Mile. And it would be something very interesting to be able to take something that was talked about 5, 10, whatever years ago and implement it now, because that 8 Mile and Gratiot corridor has been a burr in my bonnet for a while, because I am deathly afraid of those bus stations and people running across the street, and I'm just deathly afraid that somebody's going to get killed one day. And I think this is a great opportunity to do something and provide a little bit more safety for our residents. And not even just our residents, anybody who's using that as a bus stop. So, does anybody have any questions for Ms. Brashevsky on this? Oh, moving on.
Okay. So before we move to another article entirely, we wanted to guide your attention to the materials section and the lighting section that are all part of the design standards, Article 6. So one thing that we want to point out is that instead of the existing material and lighting standards being buried in the current zoning ordinance, we proposed and placed the materials and lighting section at the forefront of the design standards article so that site plan developers have an easier time to navigate the city's ordinance. So this is one way that Laura was describing how we made the reading of the ordinance easier and more user-friendly, and with the aspiration to be more business-friendly. But the rest of the material section's on page 35. And as we discussed in our steering committee and planning commission meetings, we assigned principal materials and accent materials. And you can see that principal materials must constitute at least 75% of the total facade on each building elevation, and accent materials cannot constitute more than 25%. These are all items that we discussed in the steering committee to help differentiate between the different materials and to help design more visually appealing buildings. Welcome, Commissioner Naylor.
Sorry about your vacation. Secretary, can you please note that Commissioner Naylor is here at 7:34. Ms. Naylor, Ms. Moody, Ms. Naylor.
Okay, Chair, are we comfortable with moving on to the next article?
Does anybody have any questions on Article 6, I believe it is, correct?
Yes.
Any questions on Article 6? None? Moving on.
Okay. So the next article that we would like to discuss today is Article 8, the parking, loading, and access.
What page is that?
Page 54.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we revamped this entire article from the existing article to today. This is completely rewritten and modernized. We did all of this to allow for more flexibility in the standards and to also reflect national best practices. One example of flexibility that you can see within this article is that we designated projects that are exempt from required off-street parking spaces. These are the topics that we discussed at steering committee and planning commission meetings. One exemption includes not requiring off-street parking for non-residential developers in the downtown district. However, employee parking and ADA accessible parking is still required.
Say that again for me, please.
Okay, so let's look at page 54, section 5194, general standards, B, exceptions. So actually, so A lays the foundation that off-street parking spaces are required. We all know this. Off-street parking spaces are required for business development. However, we have some exceptions. This is in subsection B. This is one way that within this article, we allowed for more flexibility in the parking section because we are saying that certain projects are exempt from requiring the off-street parking spaces. These projects are listed number 1 through 4. However, all these projects still have to provide, as we discussed, employee parking and ADA accessible parking.
I was at a restaurant in the DDA, actually, well, I think DDA stops at the high school. So I was in a restaurant this weekend picking up something, and there is a event center on the other side of the street. And I remember the event center because she was a very nice lady and she had a great plan put together, and she had a parking agreement with the restaurant. The poor man in the restaurant had no parking spaces because her cup runneth over. And I was a little concerned about that, so it's kind of stuck in my mind, worrying about these things, about other businesses being choked out of parking spaces potentially if something is getting busy. And it stuck in my mind this weekend, and then when you started talking about off-street parking, I was like, we gotta be careful here. And I almost regretted voting to approve her event center when I saw that, and I just kept thinking, this poor man, where is his customers gonna park? And it's a large lot, so. Sorry, I went off topic there. Go on.
Well, thanks, Chair. You bring up a good point. So we can go back to our use table and see where we want to contain event halls or promote event halls. And so these event halls are not allowed in the downtown, as we've had many discussions about. And then also, when we do perform parking waivers or shared parking agreements, we updated our section, this article, to require a public hearing when there is a shared parking agreement request. And that is to be transparent with the community, and so all of the neighboring properties within 300 feet of that proposed project will be notified, and they can speak their piece, and Planning Commission can make an educated, transparent decision about the shared parking agreement moving forward. So that is one area that we, thank you for guiding us there, that we did want to highlight of another improvement that we've made. So another example of flexibility in the zoning ordinance, we'll go to page 56, is allowing parking waivers. So this allows in key situations for minor reductions in parking as deemed necessary by the building official and the Planning Commission. And it's the burden on the applicant to prove that they need the space reduction because their site cannot physically accommodate the parking spaces or the parking request is excessive. So that's just one way, another opportunity that if we did not get our off-street parking numbers correct, the Planning Commission can hear on a case-by-case basis if we should allow a reduction. Moving on to page 57, we also want to show and highlight, especially since we have our RRC community planner in the room, that we're listening, and an RRC best practice is actually to require maximum parking. So we have that requirement on subsection N, page 57. We don't want to encourage a developer to overpark or provide an unnecessary amount of parking, because we've learned that overparked cities are terrible for the environment and also reduce a tax base, i.e. valuable developable land.
We don't have correct package, Chair. Our packages are not matching what she's reading on.
Ms. Hall, do we have any extra of the binders? The spiral round, the ones you delivered on Sunday? Thank you.
Actually, it's two.
Two.
Leo doesn't have one either.
Many trees died for this project. think we'll continue even
We're
while we
good
wait
now.
for Ms.
We have
Holman.
them now.
Okay,
We're good.
so page 57, we just discussed the benefits of having a maximum parking standard, which is an RRC, redevelopment ready community best practice. Moving on to page 58. Another highlight is the updated off-street parking requirements table. And staff and steering committee, planning commission worked diligently to make sure that this table was fair and accurate as much as possible. And we used information from the Institute for Transportation Engineers. So we used national best practice data and also data from locals, communities on how they require off-street parking. This article is called Parking, oh, go ahead.
Okay, I'm catching here single-family dwellings. And I know we had a discussion on that, and we really did not want to reduce it down to one. That there was actually possibly some discussion in slightly increasing it. Being the problems we have with parking in the city and have operated for as long as I can remember as a minimum of 2 off-street parking spaces per single-family home.
I thought that we reduced it to 1 because of the driveways.
We are talking about driveways as being the off-street parking places and not wanting to reduce that below the current.
Well, I'm
Thank
also reading this, it says minimum number of parking spaces per unit of measure. So am I reading it to be a minimum of 1, potentially 2?
Correct. Likely a single-family home would have at least 2 parking spaces, room in the garage and/or driveway, so off-street availability.
But I have a problem with this chart because if I look at it, I'm building a single-family home, and I'm like, oh, I only got to put a driveway in for 1 spot.
My father did it.
Would you like to talk to some of the people in East Point who have purchased homes that have no off-street parking? They do exist.
Chair, if I may. So I think, I do remember this conversation, and we brought it up with the steering committee, and I think the voice of the steering committee, and obviously we also want the voice of the planning commission, but if I can represent a voice, we heard that we want to make our parking ordinance flexible, and the idea is that people will develop parking as they see fit. So the developer of the housing project or the commercial mixed-use project knows how much parking their client needs to meet their demand. So that was the idea of the steering committee. However, if planning commission feels the need to change this, this is your time.
All right, I have an empty lot. I decide to build a home with a driveway. How many spots can I have?
How many can you have? Okay,
What's the
we'll go back
so
to
1
our
would be the
maximum.
minimum.
Sorry?
So 1 would be the minimum.
1 is the minimum.
All right, so that would be in my driveway. So my cat decides to drive, and I need a spot in the street for him, since I don't have children. How many spots do I have in the street? Do I have a minimum of 1 in the street? Street is public, but yeah. I guess in my mind, I'm trying to, I see so many streets right now, and even in front of my house. God bless my neighbors, I love them to death, but their children are parking all over in front of my house. And it becomes cumbersome, and you go down some of the side streets, and you have 4 and 5 cars in a house, and it gets kind of treacherous. I have a friend who lives on Bell. There are cars that don't move. So you know, this is, and I understand that we're talking about forward thinking and future and things like that, but there are some situations in the city right now that it's like Dodge 'em cars. So I guess my question is, how much parking, all right, we have one spot in the driveway, but how many are we allowing? Are we allowing more than one or two for the street? What's,
I don't believe we're regulating in any way, shape, or form what's in the street.
Correct.
okay.
And I think this was the discussion and the confusion when we had it was, are we talking on-street or off-street parking? My concern, and it's playing into what you're saying, if we're only going to require one off-street parking location per home, that's going to lead to more parking in this already over-congested streets. And actually, I think I had recommended that we actually increase that for residential because of that.
Mr. Chair, if I can speak. So when we did bring that back to the steering committee, we did note that it's saying a minimum. So if you put a driveway in, the distance from the street to the garage, typically how East Point is set up, is going to automatically allow for more than one. But as far as, they may have to do the shuffle, but as long as there's a driveway that will allow for a car, the length of that driveway is pretty much going to allow more than one car to park. It's just said, we said a minimum, which means we didn't have to worry about having enough width as far as dimension of having driveways 3 and 4 cars wide for a house to be built. So we said a single car, the typical length from the street to the driveway is going to allow for multiple cars. I think that was.
But, so are you telling me elsewhere in our ordinances, we're going to require driveways of a certain length?
No, not.
Because I'm a builder and I want to maximize my profit by minimizing my expenses. I come in, I pick this document up and I go, ooh, hot dog, page 58, there we are. I'm building a single-family home. I'm going to put in a 20-foot driveway for one car. That's what this is allowing me to do, and that's what I'm saying. I believe that number for residential off-street parking needs to be higher. Yeah, you can put 50 spaces in if you've got the room like Mr. DeHaan has with his extra lot. But if you're going to say a minimum of one, somebody puts in a driveway that can only accommodate one car, I don't think that's what we're intending.
I think from a builder standpoint, if he's building, and even if it's for his own personal use, most people are more than a one car. I don't see anyone going to build a property, especially if you're trying to build to sell. If they're going to just, that would be put like a, they wouldn't even have something, entrance to a garage. So if you think about entrance to a garage, typically.
Do we have a
I'm on the
requirement
point-
that a property's going to have a garage?
We don't have a minimum, but if you're gonna, we're saying the parking dimension, I'm just gonna we can change this decision. But when we brought it back to the steering commission, we were saying typically if there's a car being parked, there's gonna be some length that will allow for multiple than one. You just have to make sure there's enough width that one car can drive in. If it's not gonna be a drive to be off-street, it's a driveway. So if there's a driveway, more than likely it's gonna accommodate to get in the garage.
More than likely. I'm saying if we put it in here that you only have to have one, somebody's going to come along and put in only one, and that's what I'm objecting to. And in the discussion we're having here, we're all in agreement that there needs to be more room in a residence for parking more than one car.
Are we changing what we currently have?
Is this a?
Yes, currently we were required to have 2 spaces off-street in residential.
Currently, the code requires 2 off-street parking spaces for a single-family residential home. It might be important to note that the demographics have changed in East Point, and 70% of households in the city are 1 or 2.
Well,
Persons.
judging from the streets, there's a lot more than just one car or two cars per residence. I agree. The majority of homes here do have very long driveways. Many of them do have garages. And you try to get down the street and you see empty backyards, empty driveways, and the streets just filling up with cars.
I don't think we can regulate where people park if they choose not to park in their driveway or on the street.
No, but we can tell them you're going to have 2 or 3 or 4 spaces off-street in any new residential development. I'm not asking, I would like to see us increase that. However, I'm willing to, what I'm saying is I don't think we should be reducing it to 1.
So you're saying a minimum of 2?
I'm saying a minimum of 2. And I will reluctantly even agree with that to a multiple family dwelling.
Ms. Moody?
My concern was, are we speaking of new projects or existing residents?
This would be, in my mind, new development.
Just new developments only?
Is that where?
Because we have this word in planning and zoning and things called grandfather. If it was legal when you built it and we changed the rules, we'll let you stay as a nonconformance. Now, however, the house burns down and you have to rebuild it, guess what? The new rules come into play.
So, in the interest of not going past 9 o'clock, so this is for new development only. Do we need to change the verbiage on this? What is the standard in communities like communities? Is it a minimum of 1 per dwelling? What is the standard of other like communities?
I don't recall offhand. I know there was a parking table that was provided, I think back in December, that had the comparison of similar communities as well as the ITE standards that are recognized nationally. We can, we'd be happy to pull that out again and take a look at it.
Maybe this is one of the articles that we would revisit on the 2nd of February. And then we could also get Mr. Broll's input as well, since he's very good about those things, thinking and worrying about 50 years from now. Okay?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more of everyone's feedback about this topic.
I found that humorous only in the fact that I have a neighbor that unfortunately is going to be moving out of the community. And they were talking about the newly built residence that they bought. And that neighborhood all has 3-car garages and enough parking for an additional car in front of each one of the garage spaces. So when you say things are evolving and changing in 50 years down the road, you used to be considered pretty well off in East Point if you had a 1-car garage. A 1.5-car garage, wow, that was really fancy. A 2-car garage, now you're pretty much up there. And now you're looking in new neighborhoods where they're having 3-car garages. So,
So
Okay,
we can
thank you.
revisit this when Mr. Broll is back on the 2nd.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm fine with that.
Just so everyone knows that there are no maximum parking requirements for single or 2-family dwellings. However, there is an impervious lot coverage requirement, so we can't have a whole huge driveway on a lot. There are some regulations within that. So impervious area is essentially non-green area. Okay, moving forward, this article is called Parking, Loading, and Access. So we wanted to shine a light really quickly on page 65, our new access management section. All we did was just updated the section to incorporate the Michigan Department of Transportation standards that promote vehicle and pedestrian safety.
This was one of the aspects that was discussed heavily in the 9-mile corridor plan, access management, and the number of curb cuts that currently exist today is, wildly dangerous compared to these state standards. And by having these types of provisions in your ordinance now, since you currently, the code does not, it will allow you to make the corridor much safer as new development occurs. So for instance, when McDonald's came through with their site plan last year, it was a recommendation by the planners to eliminate that additional curb cut that they had. It wasn't a requirement per the code. Luckily, they were willing to eliminate that and create some more green space and improve the circulation. But there were no teeth to say in the ordinance to require that. And as part of this update, you will have that now.
But only on future developments.
As redevelopment occurs, yes.
If I can ask on this access management plan, is there any requirement in it where adjacent businesses will allow for pass-through of the parking lot? Whereas I've been in so many places where each business along a strip has their own parking lot, and you can't get from one end to the other within what would seem like a common parking lot.
Yes, there is a provision related to shared access. It's not in the access management section. It's in another parking provision. See if I can find that. But there is a provision in here requiring the shared access, cross-access between adjacent properties when redeveloped.
What page is that on, Laura?
It would be on page 54, or within page 54, so if you want to help us find it.
We'll continue looking for this section,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Right.
It is in here, but we'll make sure that you get the correct section number and come back to it.
What is your ultimate vision for 9 Mile? If you had, obviously everything is contingent upon redevelopment.
Mm-hmm.
What percentage of those curb cuts do you want to see removed? In a perfect world with redevelopment, what percentage of those curb cuts along 9 Mile are you looking to see replaced to slow it down a little bit and siphon it up?
That's a great question. There was a study that was done in the strategic 9-mile corridor plan, and based on the traffic speeds, the ideal spacing would be every 245 feet for each curb cut. And I think the study showed that there was approximately the average curb cut spacing was 36 feet, which is. And part of that is due to the fact that some of the curb cuts along 9 Mile, almost occupy the entire frontage of a parcel. They're unnecessarily large or wide. And so as part of the 9 Mile reconstruction, some of those will be shrunk in width, and that will be impactful alone, but the spacing between them.
I think Ms. Holman has some exciting thing to share with us.
If I may, Chair, yes, Ms. Hall is correct, and the planners have been part of the plans for the 9 Mile reconstruction. The city has a significant amount of right-of-way along 9 Mile. It is very staggered, but as the city is moving forward, making sure that, in some cases, we actually have to buy easements to make sure that the sidewalks are in the public right-of-way. But there have been discussions with many of the business owners about the width of their access points being narrowed. There are parts where some of the access points are actually already within the city's right-of-way. We're planning much more green space. Mr. McCain has actually applied for a grant that would, and we have others, but applied for one grant that would allow for rain gardens, bioswales along 9 Mile. But yes, our planners have been very involved in that, in reducing. So, if they have 2 on 9 Mile and 1 on the side street, as McDonald's did, the plan would be to remove one of the access points.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about this side.
That's a great question.
Be a good way to slow 9 Mile down without having to hurt people.
It would make it a lot safer and enjoyable for pedestrians as well, having that buffer between the roadway with landscaping as opposed to just a sloping curb. All right, so are there any other questions about parking before we move on at this time?
Anybody? I see none.
Okay. If you could please move to page 68. This is Article 9, landscaping. And in administering the zoning ordinance over the past several years, and of course this commission is familiar as well, landscaping has continuously been one of those pain points. As developers try to kind of understand and navigate through the current regulations, it is a bit confusing. And they often have some difficulty applying that to their sites. So with that in mind, Article 9, the new landscaping chapter, has been updated to be more streamlined. It still contains your current regulations, but has tried to make those as clear as possible. So there's still requirements for screening for residential properties, parking lot screening, street frontage landscaping. But then there's also a couple new standards that have been added to promote the green initiatives from Macomb County. So that would be, for instance, landscaping standards for multiple family residential projects.
What page are you on?
This starts on page 68. And
That was at the bottom of page 70 for the multi-family residential plantings.
we've broken it out into non-single-family landscape standards and then residential landscaping for both single-family and multifamily.
Mr. Lubeck?
Okay, first, I'm noticing that we now seem to be allowing a tree we previously had prohibited,
Which one would that be?
the buckeye. I know in our previous ordinance, that one was prohibited, and I'm not seeing that on our prohibited list now.
Just ignore him.
Oh, it's a legitimate question. We had it prohibited before, and we're going to allow it now? Or is that a typo?
Bears poisonous nuts.
Okay, we will revisit that.
Okay, and then I have a secondary question.
Mhm.
At one point in recent history, we had issues actually fitting plantings onto some of our existing lots. And we had adopted, for lack of a better way of putting it, and in honor of a former city manager, I'll give the acronym, a pilot, payment in lieu of trees, where if you didn't actually have the space on your property to plant the trees, that we were requiring of you. You paid a fee to the city so that the city could replant trees in some of the parks and other areas of the city. Is that incorporated in this plan or not?
That is not listed currently in the ordinance, so we can definitely add that as an option.
Okay, and now with the reduction in parking, which we did not have the opportunity before, and which was kind of something that pushed that forward, if that would actually come into play.
I think it's valid to include in your ordinance. It just provides a little bit more flexibility if there are sites that couldn't meet that standard. You wouldn't want to require plantings if they weren't going to be viable in the long run.
I mean, when it happened before, that was Planning Commission had the right to waive it, and that seemed like, well, you know, I think there's a better way to deal with that. We won't waive the requirement for the number of plantings. We'll just move the plantings to where they can be and maybe need to be.
Sounds good.
May I ask a question, if I understand what you're saying? So if someone is coming to a lot that had, meeting the site plan and there was not enough room to plant all the trees that we typically request on a site plan, because they were maybe working or developing an existing site, they have to pay to put trees somewhere else? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes. Just a brief example.
We had two of them, didn't we? Two
Uh,
previously?
This actually came about with the Subway on 9 Mile, the Subway restaurant. They came, asked for a remodel and an expansion, and there was just not enough room there to meet all the standards with parking and so forth, and plantings. And so the Planning Commission had the authority to waive plantings. And I thought, well, you know, rather than waive them, and this was at the point in time where we had the emerald ash borer that was, we were losing trees like crazy in the city. And the idea and the concept was, well, okay, you need to have 5 trees, according to our ordinance. You can only fit 3. So you pay a fee to the city for the value of 2 trees that they could then plant in a median or in a park or somewhere else. So the city would still get the benefit of the required landscaping, just not necessarily at that site creating a hardship, if that made sense.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood it correctly.
Did I answer your question?
You answered my question. I guess my question to that, I understand a waiver, just if we're doing a site plan and we waive, you know, only 3 because there's only space with the expansion so that the business can grow. And through looking for developments, if we, I mean, it just would, I guess, would be on that dollar amount. I don't want it to sound like it's punitive. Oh, your site plan doesn't allow for this plan that you have, but we're going to fine you, plant those trees somewhere else. I just wouldn't want that to be a deterrent to people thinking they're going to be punished if they can't put enough trees with our lot size requirements.
I don't see where it's a punishment if you're required to have 5 trees and you plant 2 and pay to have 3 planted somewhere else.
Okay.
That's not a punishment.
It isn't,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, the only reason why we would not be planting the trees is because we're looking at lot size restrictions, I was thinking. So if the lot size is restricted to the plan that they want to bring there, they either take the plan somewhere else because of the trees or pay the fee and put the trees somewhere else.
Correct me if I'm wrong, didn't they have an issue over at Fresh Choice and the other one? They ended up putting these islands in that had became obstructions to, you know, driving through so they could put trees in. Was that not the situation there?
I don't recall that one, no.
Well, you answered my question. I just was trying to think.
But in all of
aspect a
this,
developer
I-
and not being a deterrent.
I've had the hardest time with 8 Mile and Gratiot go through renovation after renovation after renovation with probably 2 or 3 acres worth of parking and never being required to put in any trees.
Maybe this is another topic we can bring forward when Mr. Broll is back as well. Let's get his insight as well.
Certainly. I think that the payment in lieu option is something that most communities do include in their ordinance. And it is one way to make sure that you're treating all applicants, uniformly, and that they need to meet that requirement, and if they can't do so on their site, then they would still be providing that benefit elsewhere in a public realm.
And it's a fixed fee that the city decides upon?
It could be adopted by resolution, what that fee would be. Some communities also require a professional landscape quote for the plantings that are not to be installed. So if it's a 3-inch deciduous tree, the landscaper would have to provide that quote, and that would be the amount that would be made to the community.
I believe the ordinance had the provision in it that that fee would be in the schedule of fees that would be updated and adopted every year.
Correct.
I don't know if that actually ever made it into the adoption of fees, but I believe that was the intent.
And I believe I'm getting the sign that the fee actually went down this year. Is that correct? It's very low. Okay. Good.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Laura Mara, I don't know if it makes a difference, but under the prohibited tree species, you have willow and silver maple twice.
They're really bad.
And have these always been prohibited? Because a lot of these, I see throughout the city.
Change one to Buckeye.
Why are you so dead set against a buckeye tree?
We live in Michigan, Sheila.
As she asks a rhetorical question.
Non-rhetorical. I can give you great reasons for a buckeye tree.
So I'm curious because my neighbor has mulberry trees. So they grow in nature without assistance from, it's not like anybody's going to go and plant a mulberry tree.
They're everywhere.
And they are horrific. When I had a dog, when he would come into my house, I had purple paw prints on my linoleum. So how do we stop these malevolent forces? Because people are not planting these things willingly. And they're not cutting them.
Is the question, how do you prevent those trees from occurring in nature?
Yes, because we can't seem to get our, yes.
Sure.
I would like an evolution class here, because I can't, I am tormented by these things, and it sounds like there are others that are tormented by them. So I've never seen a mulberry seedling in any farm store or any garden center. So how do we, I don't know how to.
Are you trying to ask, how do we eradicate them from the city?
Yes, how do we eradicate mulberry trees, because they just pop up?
Well, I think that's probably a discussion for a different day. But what you can do with your zoning ordinance is ensure that the trees that are being planted as part of redevelopment projects are diverse, that you have a mix of species on the site, and that you are including native species that will tolerate changes, in the next 15, 20, 25 years.
I think these squirrels are out to do us in.
Yeah, can't give those squirrels.
Where are they importing them from?
I don't know, mulberry land. All right, moving on.
Any other questions regarding the landscaping at this time?
Moving on to Article 10, signs,
Page?
page 74. We just have a brief statement to update the commission that we created a sign table by district. So previously in the existing ordinance, the sign table, or there was no sign table, but sign regulations were embedded within the ordinance under the commercial district standards, but then also within its own supplemental standards signs section. So they were all scattered throughout. Here we consolidated all information that one needs for signs, and we provided a clever table that shows what types of signs are allowed in each zoning district and their dimensions or additional sign or design standards required. Additionally, we added some graphics to help visualize what type of signs we are discussing.
Okay, can I ask a question? It just caught my eye, monument and pole signs on page 75. Cannot be located closer than 7 feet to an existing or planned right-of-way. And I'm going to defer to Kelly Road, where I think some of those signs are needed along Kelly Road, but would actually be in the right-of-way since that's what all of the parking is on that section of Kelly.
The intent of having the setback from the right-of-way is to ensure the sight lines are open for vehicles entering and exiting the property, especially like on Kelly, for instance, the amount of, you have shorter blocks. So vehicles pulling out can see within those parking lots. If an establishment wanted to construct a pole sign or a monument sign within that parking lot, they could create an island within it to do so. And I think there are a couple examples of where that exists along that corridor.
But that island would be in the right-of-way because the entire parking lot's in the right-of-way, as I'm understanding it.
Oh, I see. Okay, we might need to add an exception for Kelly. To note that if it's the city easement for parking, that could be, it could be located in that area.
Okay, because top of my head, I'm thinking of the sign for Aldi and Second Chance and Dollar Tree, where it is near one of the entrances, but right up against the sidewalk, which is very close to 9 Mile. And I'm seeing where that might be an enhancement on Kelly Road for those businesses, to be able to put one sign, maybe mid-parking lot like that, where they could put up the names of the businesses in there. And then I see this and I say, well, this would preclude that from happening. So yes, if we could have some way of being able to do that in areas like that where it would be beneficial.
Agree, yeah, we can add a footnote to that to specify if it's in, if it's along the Kelly Road corridor.
It's actually a very good idea, because how many people do you see driving down Kelly Road that really don't know where the business is? Well, it's north of this, but it would be nice to have a monument sign,
Yeah.
almost like a little strip center, and say,
Yeah,
these are here.
where we had even discussed maybe just calling each one of those plazas by the side street. Rosetta Plaza, Curtin Plaza, Oak Plaza, Empire Plaza, and even putting that sign up with this wording would not be allowed.
Heard.
Thank you. Next.
Just one other thing to mention about the sign ordinance, the definitions have been included in this section as well, with graphics to better help applicants understand what types of signage they may wish to install. If we could go on to Article 11, please. That's the nonconformity section. And
What page is that?
that begins on 92.
Thank you.
So nonconformities were discussed at length with the steering committee and how to best address them moving forward. you know, we hope that the draft ordinance does recognize that certain nonconforming uses are not necessarily adverse to the neighborhood fabric or commercial corridors of East Point. And if they were lawful at the time of their inception, that they may be appropriate to remain and to be expanded upon or reoccupied or enhanced. So Article 11 now, nonconformities, proposes two different types of nonconformities. Just by default, nonconformities in the city are considered Class B, which would not allow them to be expanded upon or rebuilt. And then there is a Class A nonconforming designation, which recognizes that some structures may not have such a negative impact and could remain, even if they don't meet the current code today. However, in order to qualify for that Class A and remain and expand, an applicant would need to file an application and to come before this body for consideration. There would be a public hearing as well to ensure that you know, those adjacent property owners within 300 feet are not feeling any adverse impacts. And there are additional standards within Article 11 by which to evaluate those Class A nonconformities. So again, you're treating all applicants uniformly. We think that will provide some flexibility as East Point is a completely built-out community and you have some of those nonconformities in existence today that you may want to see continued.
I believe Mr. Sesmansky has.
Can you give an example on that? You know, like, the house burns down. So is that, am I reading this right? So if they're on a 40-foot lot and the house burns down, they're gonna come back to the planning commission to get approval, or is that, am I reading that wrong?
So let's say it could be a residential structure. Let's say there's a duplex that burns down and it doesn't meet the setbacks. They would like to use the existing foundation and rebuild. There would be a public hearing to designate it as a Class A, and the Planning Commission could find that that is acceptable and to continue. It could also be something, one of the uses. So for instance, it could be a drive-through pharmacy that is no longer allowed in that district. They want to continue the drive-through or add on to the building. They could apply for a Class A designation and remain and expand.
Mr. Sesmansky.
I'm just saying my piece on it. If you have quite a few 40-foot lots that used to have homes there, and they were bought up, or some have been bought up to buy, build a home, but they're not allowed. And I would think that if it's a residential lot, if it had a home on it, you should be able to build the same thing, as long as it still fits the 35% of the lot coverage. I don't think you should have to come and say, please, please, please. I think it should just be written that so we can have development back in. Right now, we are choking that off. I mean, that's how I've been seeing it. I thought we talked this and we had that resolved in the steering.
So there is a provision, it's section 50220, for non-conforming lots or parcels in the R1 district only. And so this is separate than a duplex situation. And this gives, this is on page 97, I'm sorry. This gives flexibility to the building official if it's a single-family lot or parcel of record in the R1 district that doesn't meet the minimum area or width requirements of the district today. So,
Okay, now I'm confused. There was a time when we had a 50-foot lot minimum in residential areas. And that was back during the building boom. And council saw it fit to reduce that to 40 foot. And that's somehow no longer on the books.
The minimum lot width for a single-family home in the R1 district still is 40 feet, or excuse me, 50 feet. But there is a footnote in the schedule of regulations that allows for non-conforming lots of record, if they were previously permitted at 40 feet, to continue, even if they're non-conforming in that respect. When we first talked about the residential districts with the commission and the steering committee, there was an analysis done on the lot widths in the city of East Point, and there were a number that were well below the 50, even some below 40. So this would not prevent, if it's a lot of record, it would not prevent their reestablishment for a single-family home.
Okay, just a quick history lesson here. There were a lot of 80-foot lots that had been split into 40s and developed over the years. And then during the building boom, people that owned double wide or 80-foot lots were coming in and splitting them and putting a second home on. But they had to go through the Zoning Board of Appeals to be able to do that. And the thought and pattern on that was, if it is a neighborhood that is primarily 40-foot lots, you are definitely denying them a right that everyone else in that area had. Now, we had somebody come in that owned a lot and a half. Right. And wanted to split it up into 3 40-foot, 120-foot lot, wanted to split it up into 3 40-foot lots. And asked for a variance on that. They were denied. They subsequently took the city to court and lost. The situation there was the whole rest of the neighborhood was built on a lot and a half. So they could have just split it into a 60-foot lot and built. But he wanted to put 3 houses on 40-foot lots, and it did not match the neighborhood. So that's why I was asking about it, because there were so many different thoughts. But as long as it's a lot of record of 40 feet in a neighborhood of 40-foot lots, then I think residential should be home that built there that meets all the rest of the requirements. So as long as we have that language in there, and it does seem to be in there.
Are we satisfied that this is going to give the city the tools it needs to develop these 40-foot lots?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, and I think some of these 40-foot lots too may have been tax reversion properties that the city saw was in the best interest to demolish, because there was just no economically feasible way to rehabilitate them.
Thank you for your clarity. Moving on.
That's all I had for the nonconformities chapter, unless there are any other questions.
Does anybody have any questions on nonconformity?
Not tonight.
Anything down here? Nope. Okay.
Thank you. Let's move to Article 12, Development Plan Reviews, page 100. That's a good milestone.
We're halfway through this.
Are we skipping around? Because I feel like we haven't gone through all of this. No. Just the highlights. All right.
Okay, so in an effort to make the development processes more efficient and business-friendly, the updates to this section propose 3 different types of plan reviews. As you can see on the screen, thank you, Laura, we have our plot plan review, our sketch plan review, and our site plan review. And we can think of them in different tiers. So tier 1 is for more minor development projects All of the dark green boxes explain the situations of when we can use a plot plan review. And then we have the existing arrows to show us the process to engage in a plot plan review. So plot plan reviews have consists of projects that are 1 to 2 family renovations, or if we propose an additional dwelling unit, a plot plan review can be used in those situations. Other situations, a plot plan can be reviewed is when we engage in reuse or reoccupancies, which is a very familiar process in the building department. It's how existing buildings receive new tenants or new businesses. And then another project that involves a plot plan is the construction of a 1 or 2 family structure. Moving forward to our sketch plan review, it's our second tier, so a little bit probably more moderate level projects. And these projects meet minor modification standards. So no new construction of a principal building is allowed here. If new construction of a principal building other than a single family or duplex structure is performed, then they need either a plot plan or a site plan. So no new construction, and the project must not require a special land use or variance, which would mean any additional planning procedures. And before I move on to the site plan review, which we're familiar with as a planning commission, we are excited to present the sketch plan review option because it is new in the proposed East Point zoning ordinance. In the existing ordinance, we don't allow this option, and this is also a redevelopment-ready community best practice to allow for administrative approval of site plans, which we are calling sketch plans for clarity, on minor projects that don't need a public hearing or the planning commission procedures. These can be handled administratively, and it's all to help become more business-friendly and follow or be on track with our redevelopment-ready recertification. Our site plan review, we are familiar with this, but this process is used for the construction of new principal buildings. And then if projects are determined that they don't meet the minor modification standards, and that we also use our site plan review process. And as we all know, we also use a site plan review process if we have a special land use request, variance, or a planned unit development. I have another flow chart that we created. It's the last page of this section, or of this article. I'm putting it on the screen. I don't have page number.
111.
111, thank you. And we created this flow chart so we can help navigate our conversations with developers on what is our site plan review process and special land use process, because it does differentiate between different cities. So we want to make sure that we have an at-a-glance option of how we conduct business in the city of East Point. And that's all for this article, unless there are any other thoughts that we'd like to discuss.
Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
All right, if we could move ahead to Article 15. This would be page 130. This is planned unit developments, PUDs. And East Point's current code does provide for a plan development. So this is similar in that respect. But we have significantly revised the eligibility criteria for a PUD. And that is so that the city can expect the high-quality development out of a developer that is envisioned in your planning documents, your master plan, and corridor plans. On page 132, there is a flow chart that describes the PUD process. And currently, your zoning ordinance requires that planned unit developments go through the special land use process. And this really breaks it up instead into an eligibility phase and then the site plan phase. And the eligibility phase still requires a public hearing and consideration and approval by council. And then the latter half of that is the site plan review. If you look at page 133, there is a table that details what that eligibility criteria is, and this is much more in depth than your current ordinance. The language in the ordinance today is very vague. It talks about architectural compatibility to surrounding uses, which, you know, leaves a great deal of room for interpretation and discretion. This has specific standards related to connectivity, streetscape design, usable open space, sustainable design, things that are quantifiable, and the city can almost use this as a checklist in determining if a proposed PUD development would meet the threshold and move forward. So again, it's another way to treat applicants uniformly and to really set those expectations of the high-quality development that you are looking for. There's also a couple tables in this section that just detail those submission requirements and some additional items for the site plan, including the PUD agreement that would be necessary. Are there any questions on the PUD section? It hasn't been a tool that the city has utilized so much in the past, I would say. There's a couple examples of this. But moving forward with the Gratiot overlay and the redevelopment potential of those sites, this PUD would be a very useful tool for the city to have some flexibility and ensure quality at the same time.
Detailed.
All right, the last section that we wanted to just briefly mention is Article 19. That's the glossary. That starts on page 158. The terms do, at least, the definitions. This has been oriented towards the rear of the ordinance now, just for ease of use and to put the most important information at the forefront. It's also, the glossary has been organized by the starting letter of the alphabet to just kind of quickly at a glance see where you're at, which we hope will be useful to developers and the public when the city administration is working with residents and constituents. The definitions have also been all updated to match the new uses that we discussed earlier, so there's been a cross-check of that, and to modernize some of the other existing uses, or terms, I should say. So as you can see, there have been some significant changes to the zoning ordinance. I think we have tried to incorporate a great deal of detail and new regulations where possible in order to make it clear what the expectations are for projects and to treat developers the same. But there are also some flexibility mechanisms that have been added with this zoning ordinance. Again, as your community is largely built out and some sites will need to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Thank you again for the opportunity tonight to discuss and present this draft, and we're happy to take any other questions or any other feedback that you might have in general.
Commission, any questions or comments?
I do not. I mean, we've discussed all this before. So tabling it, I guess I'm a little confused when we've had many discussions on all of this before. I get Mr. Lubeck's concern because I don't know if you were here for all of them, if you were back yet. If you wanted to take time to read more,
Well, I can respond to that.
please do.
Silver maples and willows. We need to go through this and make sure that what we believe in there is actually in there. And if there are any corrections that need to be made, like we had some trees that were missing and some that were duplicates, that we can make those changes before approving this. You know, I brought up a couple of things that thought we had discussed, maybe we need to change. So, I mean, it's more than just going through and hitting the highlights. I mean, if we're
I
going to adopt
understand.
this document, I expect it to be letter perfect.
Fair enough.
And that's why we need to table, my opinion.
I'm good.
Anything from this end of the table? Okay. So shall we make a motion to table this for final review on February 2nd?
So moved?
Do we have support?
Support.
Secretary, please call the roll.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Lilbeck made the motion and Ms. Naylor supported.
Mr. Lubeck,
Yes.
Ms. Naylor,
Yes.
Ms. Moody,
Yes.
Mr. Lalonde,
Yes.
Ms. Julinski, yes. Chairman DeHunt?
Yes. Moving on to unfinished business, I see that we have none. I shall open the second hearing of the public. If you wish to be heard, you have 3 minutes to speak. Please make your way to the podium, write your name down. Nobody? Bueller? Seeing none, we shall close the second hearing of the public. As we have no training, we shall move on. We will now move on to commissioners' comments, and I'm going to start in the back of the room with the fire marshal. Ms. Holman?
So we actually do have some exciting news. Our economic development manager, Mr. McCain, applied for a fellowship, or to get a fellow from the Community Economic Development Associates of Michigan, Association of Michigan. And so we actually were awarded out of 10 regions. There are 10 regions in the state per the MEDC. So for this area, East Point was selected. We will be having a fellow that will join us in May for 15 months, full-time, working on economic development and other projects. I'm assuming that all the moving parts we have in the next year with the construction and some of the plans that you have helped our application, but Mr. McCain did a great job in getting us awarded that. It's at very little cost to the city. It's actually, the salary and everything is paid mostly by the state and CDAM, I believe. So we're looking forward to have an extra set of eyes and hands as we go into our construction. It's going to really help our ability to personally interact with the businesses and the residents at a very important time as we move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Szymanski? Ms. Haw?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say it was a pleasure being back before the commission tonight, and appreciate your diligence with the zoning ordinance. I know it's a lot of information to digest. And just to remind everyone that Mara and I are available anytime to meet with you or go over one-on-one any of the zoning ordinance questions that you have with this update. Thank you.
Ms. Brashevsky?
Thank you. I'm just happy to be part of this opportunity to have a massive impact in the city's economic development and growth, and also design. I know that we're making history here. So thanks for having me. Thanks for being an active participant in bringing all of your great ideas. And I also want to thank all of our guests here tonight for also joining in on the fun, especially our steering committee representatives and our redevelopment ready community representatives. And also just the steering committee that's also in the house too. So thank you so much. It's been fun and looking forward to February.
Mr. McCain?
Good evening. Enjoyed the discussion this evening. Want to give credit to McKenna and the entire steering committee for putting together a great new zoning ordinance. Though there are obviously a few things to to refine. I think it's a really great step in the right direction as a redevelopment-ready community and for the future community and economic development in East Point. So, yeah, really excited to see that, passed in a future planning commission meeting, and, to continue to work with McKenna and the planning commission and the whole community of East Point to continue to make East Point a great place to live, work, and play. So, thanks.
Mr. Albright?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations to McKenna. Great job on the new ordinances. Looks great. And I'd also like to, again, formally welcome Ms. Moody, Commissioner Moody, to the Planning Commission. I look forward to working with you.
We're going to jump protocol. We're going to go to Ms. Pena. Do you have anything to say?
No, thank you again for having me here. I hope I'm projecting well, but excited to see the discussion that was happening this evening. And just like Laura had mentioned, very thoughtful discussions were had, and I'm really appreciative that you guys are really being considerate of being business friendly and really trying to promote the redevelopment of the community. So excited. Unfortunately, I won't be here at the next meeting, but really looking forward to hearing back from McKenna about eventual implementation of the zoning ordinance.
Thank you. Councilman DeMonico.
Thanks, Chairman. I guess I want to say thanks to everybody. There's a lot of people that it takes to put this together. So Stephanie from MEDC, thanks. Andrea from the all kinds of things, DDA, the steering committee. Gary, thanks for coming out. I know everyone ignored you earlier. And Shaniva and Robert from the school board, thank you for coming out. Brian, Kim, Dennis, Mariah was here earlier. I know it takes a lot, and welcome back, Laura, the whole McKenna crew here, and Ian and everybody up here at the table too. Your packets are starting to look like city council packets, where it's in the 3 digits every time. Welcome to the board, Commissioner Moody, and everyone take it easy. That's all I got.
Mr. Lalonde.
I have no comments.
Ms. Naylor.
No comments. If you're on 94, there's lots of water on the freeway. Be careful going home if you have to use 94. Very bad.
Ms. Moody, do you have any comments?
No comments, just to say, again, thank you all for welcoming me, and I look forward to working with the commission.
Ms. Ulinski.
I just want to say it takes a village, and I love my village people. Bum.
Which one's the idiot?
And no, seriously, everybody does a great job. I love how we all collaborate. Grateful for all of you and very appreciative of all of you. And Ms. Moody, again, welcome. Look forward to working with you and making you part of the family.
Thank you.
Mr. Lubeck.
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Moody.
Thank you.
Sit down, fasten your seatbelt, and hold on. This is, I've been around a while, and this is one of the most exciting times I can think of in terms of planning in this community. Ms. Hall, welcome back. You've been missed. That's not to say we don't appreciate Ms. Brazaszewski and the breath of fresh air with her enthusiasm. Other than that, that concludes my comments for the evening.
Guess that'll leave it to me, the talkative one. Welcome, Ms. Moody.
Don't forget, we have a 9 o'clock hard cutoff.
I know, I got 10 minutes.
Don't use our 10. Don't use our 10.
It's fine. So I just wanted to elaborate why I was voting to table the presentation tonight. Mr. Brohl has a very unique way of looking at things. We all have unique ways of looking at things. And I just want to, before I want to vote yes, because I'll vote yes for it because I believe in it, I just want to be able to say that we have consensus with the board. So that better be a baseball game. Football or something. Yeah, thank you. I'm a real sportsman. So that's why I did that. I have watched 2 city meetings lately. I apologize I didn't listen to your interview. I was doing other things, and then I started listening to the interviews of the candidates for the open seat on council. And one lady made my skin crawl because she said something about the Planning Commission in reference to an adult daycare center. This lady had never come before us, and if I remember correctly, we were waiting for the state to put some language together before we went and voted on this adult daycare facility. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that I might have had an issue with some of the words. I think the word inmate was used, and I found it inappropriate, but we passed it. So this lady, in her interview, was going on about the Planning Commission, how something they need to be looked into. You've never been before the Planning Commission. You're saying that we need to be looked into? The ordinance was just passed, and I was morally offended. I do not accept people slamming our people, our commission, whatsoever. If somebody's going to misspeak, I'm going to get mad. I was mad. I'm still mad. And the lady said that was one of the reasons why she was applying for the open seat. So, I'm here to say, if somebody's going to slam this commission, I'm going to speak up. If we're wrong, we're going to learn from it. If we're right, I'm going after somebody for an apology. So, I will not accept that from anybody. So, that's kind of my soapbox on that meeting. The second meeting, the second hearing of the public on Tuesday was the most offensive meeting I have ever seen and heard in my life. To be accused of being the reason why we have crime in the city because somebody was not being respected. That is unacceptable. The tone, the demeanor was unacceptable. This is not a revival. We do not deserve to be admonished and spoken to like children. And if I ever speak that way, please say something. It's unacceptable. We are moving forward. Apparently, some people are living in the past. On that negative note, and I hate to leave meetings like this, I could always tell a funny joke, but you know, that is what it is. I'm done. I think we've got some great work ahead of us. I think we've got some great future. And as it is now before 9 o'clock, and I have held true to the hard stop, do we have a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have support?
You still got 9 more minutes, and I think you're still under the hourglass.
I can always do a little soft shoe and sing a song.
There we go.
We have no second. Apparently
Second.
people.
Yes.
Ms. Taylor seconds.
Seconded you.
We have motion and support.
Ms. Naylor.
Let's move it along.
Mr. Lubeck,
Yes.
Ms. Naylor,
Yes.
Ms. Moody,
Yes.
Mr. Lalonde, Ms. Julinski, yes, and Chairman DeHaan.
Yes. If anybody wants to go to Jillian's.